to read the 5 principles of realization? Okay, so some of the key things here is recognizing again the emptiness of our thoughts, the emptiness of our interior experience, that everything is just arising in our consciousness like daydreams. I'm going to go a little bit more into that. We're going to kind of balance this between rigpa awareness and dealing with our stuff that we already have in place, our samsaric patterns that are already in place, so that working both back and forth we have a maximum benefit. As I see it, from studying as much as I possibly can understand of neuroscience and brain science, and relating it to those studies that have been done regarding meditation, and there's a lot of research since the 1970s on Zen monks in Japan and transcendental meditators, Tibetan lamas, Dalai lamas, all kinds of people have been tested, brain scans, electroencephalographs, and there's an awful lot of information that's been gathered. And it's kind of the type of information that's so overwhelmingly clear of what it's saying, it's important that we take notice of it. Because sometimes we can get caught up in magical thinking and thinking that the mind is just the mind and it has nothing to do with the brain. I remember a recent conversation I was having with somebody, not here, where I was talking about the brain and certain tendencies and patterns within the neural pathways of the brain, and they were saying, oh, I don't think the brain has anything to do with our consciousness or our behaviors. And I said, well, I think there's overwhelming evidence that you're completely wrong. Overwhelming evidence. But you can have magical thinking about anything you like. So let me first kind of build this up from the ground up so you understand the way I approach this. The traditions approach it the same way even though they didn't understand the neuroscience. The Tibetan traditions, the Zen traditions, and these other traditions, they understood that there was deeper levels of confused states of consciousness that have relationship to the body and the brain. And they addressed it through different ways of doing shamatha meditation, calm abiding, learning to focus, concentrate, getting your mind from being scrambled like a monkey jumping around up in the trees and making it focus down to one point. And the ability to bring your mind and concentrate it down to one point, and all other thinking processes stop. That's really one of the benefits of shamatha. The mind becomes workable and it follows intention. So it's like you've got this unruly monkey in your head, and now we're training the monkey. This is not enlightenment. This is training the monkey. This is bringing the monkey down to calmness, to where it's just sitting there still. And so they worked a lot on that level of meditation and other preliminary practices that people would do before they would go into the higher practices, because they recognized without a foundation of these earlier practices, most people would only have a career of yo-yo up and down. They'd go up and then they'd lose it. They'd go up and they'd lose it. The whole life could go by like that. The question, though, is because some traditions have years and years of preliminaries that you do before you really get to the stuff that can really cause and bring about liberation, the question is, are those practices appropriate and necessary, or did they just become cultural baggage and people are carrying through things that really technologically aren't that beneficial? maybe have some benefit. I'm only interested, and I consider myself a technologist. Somebody say, are you Buddhist? Are you a Sufi? Are you this? No, I'm a technologist of consciousness and spiritual awareness. I'm interested in the technology, the methodology that works the best for the greatest number of people, consistently, where you can produce a result consistently given certain similar circumstances that you can work with. So I've been always very interested in discerning what are some of those methodologies and understandings that can be of the greatest benefit, kind of in the sense of preliminaries. And so let me go into that a little bit, and then we're going to do some practice on those levels that are absolutely critical. Because we all know there's many lamas, many American Zen masters in quotes, and also Japanese Zen masters who, in many ways, their lives are a train wreck in terms of sexual abuse, abuse of power, power trips and things like this. And this is because the really essential groundwork wasn't done properly. They went through all the necessary preliminaries, but I'm questioning the value of those preliminaries because the results aren't there in people that are supposedly high lamas of much practice. So then what really works? And what are we working with? What is the issues? What are we trying to accomplish with a clear understanding of what are the issues? If we're going to cure a disease, we first have to understand what the disease is. We have to understand the disease completely if we're going to be looking at how to cure it. So this is what I've been able to gather from all of this. And this has been over 30 or 40 years of looking at this both scientifically. I've always been interested in science and brain science and biology since I was, 12 as well. And so I give a lot of value to science when it's truly objective and isn't just an effort of somebody to sell some thesis because they'll get university grants and corporate backing if these are marketed and sold appropriately. I'm more interested in what really produces results. So this is what I've gathered. It seems that on any cognitive process that takes place in our mind, whether we're practicing Togal or whether we're practicing in a state of clear awareness, or whether we're seeing colors, whatever we're doing, there's brain activity that's taking place. And if all of us were in a similar sort of brain state and we could have an MRI and an EEG done, we would probably show similarities of certain areas of the brain that are being active during those specific experiences. The corollaries will always be there in the brain. There's been enough brain research done, and I could go into this for 2 hours of talking about brain research. It was enough to convince me of what I'm sharing with you now, is that every thought has something that's occurring in the brain. It can be traced to that. Every imaginary scenario in your mind has correlations in brain activity. I'm not saying that everything is created or originates in the brain. I'm just saying whether it's passing through the brain or it's coming out of the brain, there's brain activity associated with all changes in our consciousness and awareness. And what happens as we're getting older, neural pathways that are connecting certain parts of the brain, emotional centers, sensory centers, start to become established. And when we have certain styles or ways of thinking, or of relating to our emotions, to our memories, there's certain neural pathways that become like a pathway in the woods. It becomes well worn down, the weeds are worn down, and you've got a kind of a permanent pathway there. Well, that occurs in our brain. We know people that are suffering from long-term mental illnesses. Their brain patterns are different than people that are healthy. And when those people recover and become healthy, the brain patterns change. So each one of us has, from our childhood and growing up, we have neural pathways that are like grooves, you could say, in which the synapses are firing in a pattern, communicating with different parts of the brain that are relating to our mental activities. And so we have these well-worn pathways. Other studies now have shown that individuals who have a strong sense of selfing, ego consciousness, they found in brain scans, those people who are saying, in this moment, I'm really feeling in my ego self, 9 different areas of the brain are interconnected at that time. Neural pathways are connecting those areas and they're showing activity. When individuals, lamas or whatever, are saying they're in a selfless state, those areas are not connected and they're not showing activity. It's through these types of studies they've been able to bring this down to these types of correlates in the brain. It's, again, it's not saying, although it may be, that these activities in the brain are what causing these things, but all we know is that they're going on at the same time, parallel, corollary. So we have a state of consciousness, a brain state, that is our default brain state. We can get high on alcohol or drugs, or we can go into a samadhi meditation. When we come out of it, we are normally pretty much back to the default condition we were previously. That's because of the habitual neural pathways that are already established in the brain. They're there now by default. That's why we always keep regressing to where we were. We don't stay in that high, clear state because the neural pathways are what we default to. So when we're in this higher energized state, due to the law of entropy, that higher energy loses its energy, its energetics, and everything collapses back down to the way it was. And that's our experience of going like this. Well, it's been discovered in, I don't know, the last 30, 40 years, what's called the brain's plasticity. That the brain is actually, we can reprogram these neural pathways. And the old pathways will become unused, and new pathways will replace them. And we found that the brain is very plastic in this sense. It's moldable. We can change behaviors. We can change emotional ways of relating. We can change our whole default way of relating to our world and ourselves through doing certain exercises, mental exercises, physical activities, can reroute and reorganize the way the brain is communicating to itself through different areas of the brain that are connected. One of the most recent studies that's impressed me the most was the work of John Kabat-Zinn, where studies were being done. Also, a lot of this was done with transcendental meditators, that after doing the 8-week John Kabat-Zinn course, 45 minutes a day, and they did this with a control group, and they did it with another group to see how the results would be versus one group and another group, not doing the meditation 45 minutes a day of similar characteristics. And from doing 45 minutes a day of mindfulness meditation, like focusing on your breathing, focusing on a point, focusing on bodily sensations, at the end of the 8 weeks, they found measurable differences in the hippocampus of gray cells, gray neurons. And in that particular area of the brain, it's associated with a monitoring and controlling and dispersing emotional states, negative emotional states. So they found also on giving these people psychological tests during and throughout in the end that their scores were changing in terms of how they assessed their enthusiasm for life, absence of depression, improvements from states that they had. And they're seeing differences in the brain just from 8 weeks, actual measurable to where you can see increased brain cells are growing in the hippocampus. And they're also noticing that neural networks that normally are connecting the amygdala, our center of emotional response in the limbic system associated with the more primitive responses Some call that the reptilian brain. There are more primitive urges and instincts. Those connections are not showing to be as active. So we're seeing transformation in a meditator's brain just from doing meditation. And those people that completed the 8-week course did not show any immediate regression after they stopped. These new neural pathways and these cells in the hippocampus that were reinforcing positive behavior experiences or emotional experiences, they lasted. Didn't last as long or as strong, but they did last for a period of time. Then later, we take that piece of, that's a huge, vital piece of information. It's showing that we can restructure the brain. They've also shown that schizophrenics, people with mild schizophrenia, and people with other mental illnesses of one kind or another, if they do the same meditation program, they show improvement, and certain areas of the brain that were normally all connected through the amygdala, all of a sudden those areas are no longer being connected, and they're seeing positive responses in those areas of the brain that produce more positive emotions. So again, simply by doing mindfulness meditation, people who are severely ill are seeing improvement just through changing the brain, through meditation, by doing certain exercises that are causing the neural networks in the brain to reform pathways and neglect old pathways, by doing specific exercises that do that. Recently, I read, which was a nice continuation of this, that some groups of lamas were tested with EEG, electroencephalograph, all the little wires on the head, and they had been meditators for 40, 50 years and had really been accomplished meditators. These were Tibetan lamas, older people. And they showed, as the brain wave, we've normally heard about brain waves, alpha waves, theta waves, beta waves, and these sort of things. But with these guys, the topic was gamma waves. And gamma is not a normal reading topic for the human brain to the degree that it was with these lamas. These lamas were showing a threshold of gamma wave frequency. And these frequencies mean that they go through the entire brain, this frequency of wavelength of gamma wave, 40 times per second. So every second, this wave of gamma wave goes through the entire brain like a big wave and comes back and makes this cycle 40 times. That's called 40 hertz. Some of those lamas went up to 80 or 90 hertz. Most humans don't register even up anywhere near 40, average humans. And they've never seen a human anywhere near 80 or 90 hertz, except for epileptics that are having a seizure, which I don't know, whatever that means. But in any event, these lamas were describing they were in a very deep samadhi, a rigpa state, and in a very deep compassion state. They were doing compassion meditation on the heart, mostly. And what they noticed happens when it gets to that 40 hertz and more of gamma, which means if we all meditate and we get our meditation going deep, the gamma wave function will begin to manifest. And what they notice is when the gamma wave manifestation becomes 40 hertz and above, all of the wavelengths in the brain activity begin to resonate with that 40 hertz of gamma. And that brings about a state which we could call harmony, but in neuroscience they call it synchrony, like synchronization. They call it brainwave synchrony. The entire brain is vibrating at this 40 hertz. And they call that process entrainment. Everything is becoming entrained to that wavelength frequency. So the brain in this condition is reprogramming. And that 40 hertz above of gamma wave frequency is literally reprogramming the neural pathways in the brain, because the 40 hertz and that particular condition is activating certain areas of the brain that are what we want: deep sense of compassion, deep awareness, non-involvement in primitive emotional states of fear, anxiousness, and so forth. all of those neural pathways are dropping away in terms of becoming unused anymore. And so their whole brain is becoming transformed from this. And here's where I come into what happens next. And based on a lot of other pieces of this and this and this, here's where I will carry my version of what happens next from that science. Once we get our brain in that degree of synchrony, it's like an orchestra, a symphony, to where every 50 of the members in the symphony are all playing the exact same note at the exact same time. A person with schizophrenia or other types of mental illness, it's as though the symphony, each person in the symphony is playing a different tune. There's no harmony. It's a complete cacophony. There's no symmetry. So when this state of synchrony is occurring, once it gets to 40 hertz and above, where these people are talking like in a rigpa samadhi state, the lamas, what I say is happening, in my experience of my deep meditations as well, what occurs, there comes a point where suddenly you're no longer just in a normal mind state. This samadhi occurs, this rigpa occurs, and the way I've translated that into modern language, but I think it's actually the case, quantum processes in the brain begin to manifest. The actual quantum processes that are normally not experienced. We normally experience the normal activity of the wave frequencies of the classical brain, an animal brain that's functioning in the way it normally functions. So these quantum functions start to occur in the brain, and at that moment, when we get that degree of synchrony, like these lamas did, that vibration activates the chakras, the crown chakra and the third eye in particular. And that activates the kundalini within those chakras, which begin to transform the whole energy state in the consciousness of the being. And when that starts to happen, that's when we experience rigpa. So if we took somebody who's in rigpa, we would see that their brain state is in these high gamma wave frequencies, and we would see all of those different areas of the brain, the primitive areas of the brain and so forth, are not active in this time, because that's not experienced. We're not having experiences of fear or anxiety. And so the longer we have the brain in that first kind of like takeoff stage of synchrony, which activates the crown chakra particularly and the third eye chakra, we then are experiencing this quantum state of consciousness that we now call rigpa. And if we then cease our practice, we may stay in rigpa for a while, but then slowly the brain loses that resonance and it defaults back to the normal neural pathways that haven't been completely reprogrammed yet. They've just been overridden. And then we're back and we're saying, oh, what happened to my rigpa? And we're pretty much back where we were. So that means we have to do these practices where these scientists also said these lamas don't come out of the gamma wave frequency range. They stay there. It's a permanent change in their brains. They have permanently changed their brains into this synchrony where they don't experience these negative emotions anymore. Those areas of the brain are no longer on the pathways that are being activated. And if they do, they're just a firing, but there's no consistency in linking up with other parts of the brain. So we're talking about that particular aspect of habitual meditation. And it's transforming the brain itself, which allows the brain to go into a synchrony state of gamma wave synchrony, which then allows that samadhi state to be deep enough to where the chakras are being activated through resonance. And then we have this quantum consciousness called rigpa, which arises. So that's kind of the program of what we need to be doing. Otherwise, we keep reverting back to this other state, this earlier state, because we haven't transformed the neural pathways. So one of the things we have to do, we have to break the neural pathways that have already been there, because our tendency is for the mind and consciousness to manifest through how the neural pathways in the brain are already structured. So for instance, if we're daydreaming, we have to catch that and break ourselves out of that daydream. If we're involved in a thought, we catch that and we just break ourselves out of that thought. If we're in a chain of thoughts or a little story, we catch that and we break ourselves out of that with some degree of vigor. We catch that until we don't need that vigor. We recognize it and we break that. So if we're standing around and we're being in a retreat setting, it's best that we're just silent and we're recognizing what's occurring in our mind. And as we have a tendency to go into a daydream, we break that. If we have a tendency to want to chit-chat, we feel that tendency and we break that. We're completely breaking all of these neural pathways in the brain that are sustaining what we call samsara and our suffering. And our state of ego consciousness is all being sustained by this. We know also when the individuals are in this high gamma wave frequency state that those 9 centers that usually are connected together and give the sense of self, those are not activated. And the lamas are not experiencing self in that condition. They're experiencing absence of self. So people say, well, I've realized the absence of self, but it's come back and it keeps coming back. That's because you haven't reprogrammed the program that's bringing self about. That self is a evolution through the DNA, through the species, through the organism, to give the organism kind of a control center that can ensure its survival and differentiate it from possible enemies or threats in the environment. Uh-oh, that could be harmful to me. Well, what's in it for me? It's all survival geared. It's all about me. So that's in the DNA. That's in the software. That's in the hardware. But that can be all reprogrammed. So this is at the base level. Once consciousness resonates into the chakra level, and that becomes somewhat stable, that then resets the whole lower system of the brain. And you're staying in the resonance of the crown chakra, which is our consciousness. It's our actual consciousness. So it's really important that we break these tendencies again and again and again and again, because the neural pattern, the tendency is like an addictive pattern. To want to do as an alcoholic or as a drug addict or any type of addiction, sexual addiction, food addiction, whatever it may be, these neural pathways are firing. They're saying, do this now, do this now, do this now, do this now. We have to ignore all of those impulses, thoughts, tendencies, and just ignore those and let them release. Observe them, let them release. If we could just simply be in a state free of daydreaming, we would be where we need to be. The daydreaming we're doing almost constantly, little vignettes of this, little stories, little pieces of this, that's what samsara is. It's living in that daydream with a subject, a me, and the story of me, and my agenda, and my things, and my relationships. All of those daydream stories are almost occurring constantly. That's what keeps the mind locked into samsara. And the Buddha said this is how you get out of this mess. You see the emptiness of those arisings. Those neural firings are just little boop, boop. And unless they're linked together by the attention of consciousness, they don't amount to anything. If they're allowed to link together, they crystallize into a whole formative experience. That then, once that forms, it's then associated with all of the past history and conditioning with whatever that topic is that just formed, crystallized. And then you've got all of the karmic conditioning and the emotional moments associated with those past similar experiences, all being fired and brought to life in this now emotional, overwhelming moment. I'm telling you guys, there's no shortcut. You have to reprogram your brain. I'm telling you. I've been doing this long enough. You have to reprogram your brain. There's no other way to do it. On the base level. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think these, very popular nowadays, these brainwave programs where you put 40 hertz or gamma waves on you listen to them and they bzz, bzz, bzz. I've listened to them a few times. Do you think they can have anything to do with this or help?
They could, but I don't know anything about the science on it. You know,
No.
people always come out with new stuff and create some devices to sell
Yeah.
and to make money,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not necessarily functional, or it may have minimal function. I don't know. I
No.
just am ignorant of that.
Yeah.
If there
also
was
just-
something like that, we'll see something like that, I'd be 100% for that if there's something that can do that. But I can tell you along this conversation, one of the things that can bring that synchrony to the brain as well as to the chakras and get this thing on track immediately is practicing Togao. When you practice Togao, it can bring about a wavelength frequency of the highest level that overrides all of those other frequencies, and it reprograms the brain completely and very deeply. Once you're able to practice Togao, you can't practice Togao until you're to that level of the brain being already in synchrony, or you will have no Togao phenomena occur. Togao phenomena occur when the brain is in total synchrony, which we call trekchod. Thank you, Mary. The brain is already in the synchronous state. That's how it's always taught. You can't do Togao until trekchod, which means the state of complete relaxation and presence of awareness. Until that's somewhat stable, Togao won't work. I'll explain all this.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what is it?
It's just a level of the Dzogchen, which I will explain, and I'll be teaching that level as well as we're here. So, in my experience, that's the fastest way. Once you've experienced that and there's a certain degree of reprogramming already present, to go from a scattered brain and trying to do Togao, all the Dzogchen masters say, it just doesn't work. Well, now we know why it doesn't work. We don't have the chakras activated, we don't have the light channels open. All of that occurs when the brain is in the synchrony and the chakras are vibrating and the whole inner subtle system is online and it's happening. Then it's very easy to experience the clear light through the light channels, through the eye, coming up through the heart, and experiencing this dimension of clear space, the yin of the inner sky appearing as the outer sky, which is your unfolding of this inner state of pure rigpa consciousness. That won't happen. That's why it's set up that particular way to do. But now we know mechanically why it doesn't happen.
What about pranayama? Breathing, different breathing practices?
Well, all of the methods in yoga, Raja Yoga, Laya Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, all of those things, all of those practices are doing this. They're all designed to bring about this state of brain synchrony, samadhi. The goal of all yogas is to bring about a state of samadhi. The end goal of all yogas, including Buddhist yogas, is to bring about a state of nirvikalpa samadhi, which is a state where there is no conceptualizing thinking taking place. It's a pure, clear state of non-conceptualization. That's what all pranayama, kumbhaka, all of the postures and all of that in both Buddhist Tantra and both in Hindu Tantra, they're all designed to bring about this condition of samadhi, or of contemplation, this meditation state, being able to do that. So it's important to me to not to give you not the full benefit. You need to understand that you have to work through this and transform your consciousness and transform your brain. It has to be, or else you keep regressing and then coming back and regressing and not understanding it. You have great intellectual insights, but those core human issues haven't been transformed.
So the direct path is actually only for those who are ready for the direct path.
There is another way. It does the same job if you can work with it. And I'll share that with you now. Thank you for the lead-in. If you listen carefully to what I'm saying now, and we spend a little bit of time on this saves you an awful lot of time doing an awful lot of meditation. And it liberates you immediately if you understand this. We're going to do some practice with this immediately following what I'm going to be sharing with you now to make it more clear. No matter what mental state or emotional state is present, no matter what thought is in your mind, there's always the awareness of that thought. There's always the awareness that's knowing this experience perceptual. There's always the, I'm going to switch now from awareness to knowing. Knowingness. There's knowing. You're knowing. You're knowing that I'm here sitting talking to you. There's a knowing. That's a little less substantive than awareness. Just a knowing, a naked knowing. There's a knowing occurring. So no matter what you're experiencing, suffering, you're knowing. There's a knowing of the feeling of the experience of suffering. If you're happy, there's a knowing of this happy condition. If you're anxious, there's a knowing about this anxiousness, or else it couldn't be experienced. So something has to be knowing the condition of anxiousness, anxiety. So no matter what condition we can think of, there's always a knowing of that condition. That knowing doesn't change in any condition. That knowing is always unchangingly pure knowing. It's not separate from the condition, just like the reflections in the mirror aren't separate. The reflections are occurring in the mirror, so to speak. It's like waves on the water, on the ocean. You can't separate the waves from the ocean. In this case, the ocean is the knowing, and the waves are experiences. So no matter what experiencing of any kind that's occurring, there's always the knowing of that experience. And the knowing of that experience is never conditioned by that experience. It's always just an empty knowing that's present in all experience. It's not an observer as a knower, it's just the knowing in experience, which is kind of hard to communicate conceptually. It's experiential, understanding the oneness of this knowing and experience. But the key here is to understand, and this is the most important communication in Dzogchen, is the knowing that's present in any experience is unconditioned by every experience. It's not altered, modified, damaged, or improved by any experience. So our knowing of any perception is not changed by that perception. Our knowing of any samsaric, powerful negative experience, it's not conditioned because it's always just knowing again. Something could happen to you horribly. You could be molested and tortured and whatever, and I could come up to you and say, how you doing? Horribly. And I say, are you knowing that? Yes, I'm knowing that. It's horrible. So that knowing, no matter what the situation is, it's always present. That's the part that's never conditioned. That's rigpa. It's that empty knowing that's always present. So there's nothing you have to do. You don't have to do any meditation. You don't have to do any practice. You don't have to do any thinking about it or philosophizing. You're just recognizing the knowing that's present in whatever experience you're in, that's what you are. You're that knowing. You're not the body. You're not the mind. You're not the story. You're not the ego. You're not the me. When the sense of me arises, a strong sense of ego, Something's knowing that, feeling. That knowing is the rigpa. The rigpa, the knowing, is always present in every moment. Nothing changes it or alters it. So when the mind, something happens, and then this pseudo sense of self-identity just sort of dissolves, and in the moment the identity now is just the knowing. You're that knowing. It's been recognized. Recognizing you're the knowing and knowing you're the knowing, non-conceptually, as an actual condition, is what rigpa is. We're always in rigpa, but we're not always knowing we're the know. We're that knowing.
That's making sense.
So that's why there's nothing ever to correct or to improve in our condition, our life condition, our body condition, or any condition, because the knowing of our condition never changes. It's only the changes that change, the forms that change, the energies that change. But this awareness that's aware right now, it never changes. It's always just this knowing. It has no substance, it has no form, but it's an aware knowing. That's what you are. That's your ultimate essence, is this knowing. When you recognize you are just simply this knowing in all circumstances, then there's no such thing as death. There's no such thing as birth, because you're the knowing in all circumstances. Death and birth don't apply to the knowing. A death condition is occurring of the body. I'm dying. Are you knowing about that? Yes. The knowing is always present. Knowing never goes away. So that's the other route. Recognizing you're simply the knowing in every circumstance. It is so simple. All the masters say the reason people don't get this and they do this and this, it's so simple, so obvious, so direct, so immediate, so right here, right now, that you're just simply this knowing of this moment and every moment. And that knowing never changes.
Could you almost say that you're the mind of God then?
You're the, no, I would say you're the, if that's the experience of the mind of God.
I'm thinking of the mind of God being everything.
Okay, the knowing of that mind of God experience being everything, the knowing of that is the mind of God. That knowing is the absolute, the real absolute that the Vedantists are talking about. As long as they leave it alone and don't call it Brahman or Atman or say the self or whatever, because that's putting something on this completely empty knowing,
Okay.
which gives it kind of like a description.
Yeah.
And we can't describe empty knowing because it's simply empty knowing. And then if we go further with this, and I don't want to go there, then we say this empty knowing actually is everything.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was.
But in that being everything, it's the knowing as everything. It's not just melting into everything. It's the knowing is never absent.
So knowing you're melting.
Well, there's no you melting because you're just the knowing. There's nothing, there's
I think I'm getting it.
the knowing. Are you knowing that I'm saying something to you? That's it.
Okay.
If you're feeling shitty and you're knowing that, that's it.
So that's also a very powerful Bardo tool, the powerful Bardo tool, because you recognize that you are not what you're experiencing, you are, how do I say this, you know, you are dead, you know, you are dying, like you told me something, can you explain that, Rhoda, what Oscar says when you're working with people who have just died, remember?
But you, right after they die,
Yes,
that you whisper in their ear
yes,
their full name. Now
Yes.
you have died.
yes. That's that's the reminder just in case they forgot.
Exactly.
Just because if they don't know that, then they continue in the dream
Correct.
of whatever the
The mind
Bardo story is
identifying
playing.
with things.
Yes.
Oh, I'm this self-identity. Oh, I'm this body. I'm this snake. I'm this
Yes.
rope.
Yes.
I'm this, and this, and this. Until all of that comes just finally, it comes to an end. Oh, I'm just the knowing present in everything as everything.
Right.
That's the end. There's no searching. What are you searching for? Because you're already the knowing of every condition. Got it? All right. Let's give her a hand.
Take the ball.
So beyond the thought, obviously, beyond the know or the witness stage, in your handout there was a question about self-inquiry. Is that past that state? Is that the fruit of the self-inquiry?
No, this
the
is
knower?
this is work. This is talking about not recognizing that you're the knowing and kind of working your way through things until the light switches on. That's this. Or any practice. What we're talking about is the real Dzogchen and essence Mahamudra. What's communicated by these masters when they do make a real direct introduction is that it already is the case. And no matter what your condition is, the knowing of that condition in that condition is your absolute condition.
So can that persist? I guess with practice it'll persist through dream state and sleep state, so all three states.
It doesn't require practice
Okay.
because there's knowing present in every condition.
So somebody with that will be aware, will be knowing throughout the three states.
No, the knowing is current by everyone in every condition. Everybody is always knowing. There's no exceptions. It's not like after they do practice they get it. They become a knower, a knowing. Our nature is just this pure empty knowing. That's what we are in the ultimate essence. We're just this empty knowing that never changes. It's eternally, and even eternally doesn't make sense because it's not existing across time. Time and space are appearing, and the knowing is knowing of all of that, but not as a separate object. That's what I don't want to get into. It's when the knowing recognizes the knowing as being what our self-nature actually is. In that moment, the relationship to all of this is experienced and known. To say conceptually and try to explain it conceptually always creates a dualistic model, because the language is dualistic.
So earlier you had mentioned that one of the attributes, whatever you want to call that, of rigpa was wisdom. So the knowingness is also an attribute, being self-awareness.
That is pure wisdom.
Right.
That
So-
knowing is what real wisdom is. It's knowing.
And so
And
there's
that's-
no witness, there's no thoughts. So is there a way to?
No, there can be
Obscure anything?
all of those things can occur, and just the knowing of those
Continues.
is in that moment of rigpa. What happens to thoughts when the knowing recognizes the knowing? What happens to the dog when the knowing recognizes the knowing?
Gone.
It dissolves. Because the energy of the knowing, when the knowing recognizes itself, that energy that's formed there, it's no longer being fed energy as attention, and it dissolves.
So there is no real practice to it?
No. What's there to practice? You're already knowing.
Non-practice.
But just be in it.
You are already being it. It's recognizing it.
Recognition.
Okay.
It's recognizing it.
You are it.
You are this knowing awareness. And it's not to say like some Advaita, it's like you are that. And I've always said, well, how useful is that? You are that. It's like, I am that. Okay, I'm that. Yeah, so? But knowing, you can relate to that. Are you knowing? Are you knowing that you're talking? Are you knowing that you're thinking? Are you knowing that you're feeling? Are you knowing that you're seeing? Are you knowing that you're hearing? Everybody can relate to knowing. Yes.
Right. So if you, like we talked about the dog, and it's like withdrawal of that energy when you know.
Right.
Then can you function in the world while you're in a knowing state?
How are you doing?